I was talking with someone the other day, and they said they had a problem with our movement. And the problem was, they said, you all share too many sad facts. They said you need to have a dream like Dr. King. And I said, did you listen to the first 17 minutes of the speech? When he talked about being tired of having a check bounce and written on it insufficient funds. And then I asked him, well, what do you do with all of this? What do you do with all of these testimonies? Do you ignore my queer brother from Maine? Do you ignore my sister, my Native American sister, my Native American? Do you ignore a mother who's afraid for her black child, or she's white, that one day he won't be threatened because of his skin color? What do you do with it? What do you do with 45% of New Yorkers living in poverty, if you know that? 58% of children, 2.4 million. What do you do with 8.6 million people living in poverty and low wealth in New York? Yes, Wall Street is here, but broken down people are here too. What do you do with a million people or more without health care? You just ignore it. What do you do with a person working a minimum wage job having to work 109 hours a week in New York just to afford a 2-bedroom apartment? And there's not a county in this country that claims to be the wealthiest country in the entire world where a person can work a minimum wage job and afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment and can afford to eat meat or to eat decent 3 times a week. And yet we have a $21 trillion gross domestic product. What do you do with that? What do you do with a state where there's 5.4 million poor and low income voters in this state? And too often they're ignored, and only about 3 million vote because they've just given up on the system. What do you do if you know that in Vermont, there's 35% of Vermont, we don't even talk about Vermont most of the time when it comes to poverty, but 35% of Vermont is poor and low wealth. 44% of the children, 59% of black people, 50% of Latinos, 36% of all white people, 210,000 plus people. What do you do with 24,000 folk in Vermont without health care? And in Vermont, you have to work 80 hours a week at a minimum wage job just to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. What do you do? Just ignore it? Because somebody says, you all bring up too many sad facts. What do you do when you know that in Maine, 34% of Mainers are poor and low income, 450,000 people, 120,000 children, 280,000 women, 39% of white people, 467,000 white people are poor and low wealth in Maine. What do you do with that, especially since we live in a country that often wants to make poverty just a black issue or a brown issue? What do when you know that in Maine, you've got to work 70 hours a week to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment? What about Massachusetts, where there are 36% of people are poor and low wealth? 2.4 million people. The state where they claim to have some of the great institutions like Harvard and MIT, and yet 47% of children are poor and low wealth. 43% of women. 43% of women, 1.4 million black people, 1.6 million white people. What do? Rhode Island, 36% of Rhode Islanders are poor and low wealth, 360,000 people. And in Rhode Island, you've got to work 7 to 8 hours a week at minimum wage just to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. And waitresses and waiters have to work more because they don't make but $2.13 an hour, even today. And what do when you find out, because you do a study to look at how poverty and the pandemic connected? And you do a study hoping you're not going to find out what you have heard in various stories from people. And then the study comes back and it tells you that in America, the systems allowed the pandemic to feed on the poor. And poor people died at a rate of 2 to 5 times more than other folk. And it's not due to not getting vaccinations. That the pandemic didn't discriminate, but we did. What do you do when you find out that 60% of the folk that died didn't have to die? If we had tracked how poverty was and what people didn't have before COVID, and if we had said in the midst of COVID we're going to at least guarantee health care and guarantee services, but instead we took people who were service workers and renamed them essential workers, but then treated them like expendable. Now what do you do with that? Well, I tell you, I'm tired. I'm tired tonight. I'm tired. I'm physically tired. We just came back from West Virginia. I'm physically tired because I'm in the midst of an ankylosing spondylitis arthritic flare that kicked in about a month ago that has heated up all the joints in my body. But that ain't what I'm most tired of. I'll deal with that with God's help. I'm tired of this country saying that ain't nothing we can do. Because over 2,600 years ago, the prophet Amos actually told us what to do when you're in a situation like this. Yeah. A text honored by Muslims and Christians and Jews and even people are not people of faith, but they glean the wisdom from this text. It says in Amos chapter 5 to the nation, you might hate this kind of truth, but I'm going to tell you. It's wrong. And it's not popular. You run roughshod over the poor. You take bread out of their mouths. You take bribes on the left and the right. And some people have thrown up their hands and said that justice is a lost cause. But I need some people that will seek good and not evil. I need some folk that will work it out in the public square. And then verse 16 of Amos chapter 5, it says, God says, I need a group of people that will go in the streets and cry as loud as you can. I need a group of people that will fill up the malls, and fill up the shops, and weep loudly, and declare, not us, not on our watch. Empty every office, store, factories, workplace. I need some folk that will act like something's wrong. God says, I want to hear it, and then if I can hear you crying, I'll give you some extra help. And then Amos says that God says, I'm sick of your religious meetings, I'm sick of your conventions, I'm sick of your political meetings, I'm sick of your fundraising schemes. You know what I want? I want justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. My brothers and sisters, we've got a chance here. While the nation is hurting, to help break the heart all the way open so the nation can recognize that not only do we need to shock the heart, we need a heart transplant in America. Something wrong with us when you can go through a pandemic and you don't even make sure folks have health care. MIT professor Otto Schwammer says there's a blind spot in American economic theory today. It's called consciousness. Our refusal to recognize that we are all integrated, that we really do need each other, that Wall Street can't keep other folk in the ditch unless Wall Street stays in the ditch with them. Another scholar in a book called America Beyond Capitalism said that what we're seeing is the process of slow decay, punctuated by a recurring economic crisis. And what's going to happen is you'll move and it'll drop and it'll move and it'll fall out because we've got these trends of inequality, economic dislocation, failing democratic accountability, deepening poverty, ecological degradation. And what's happening is people slowly and quietly are beginning to lose any hope in the capabilities and the moral integrity of the system. Somebody's got to step up and try to save this country from itself. And that's where you and I come in. That's where you and I come in. That's why you and I are alive. We've been called to say to this nation, you can't live in isolation. You can't let things happen to other folk and think that it's not going to eventually happen to everybody. Somebody's got to see good and not evil. Somebody's got to say, everybody has a right to live. Somebody's got to tell the truth. Somebody has to say there are consequences. This nation's foundations cannot handle the weight of almost half of its people living in poverty and low wealth much longer. You think January 6th was something when a bunch of middle class and upper middle class folk led by white supremacy did what they did? I don't want to see what happens when poor and low wealth people lose hope. It is from that place of despair that Hitlers and autocrats and demagogues grow out of. What we're doing here, brothers and sisters, is more than just having a nice day to curse. We're really on a mission of salvation. We're on a mission of love. We're on a mission of truth-telling. We're trying to say to America, save yourself. It doesn't have to go loud like this. That's why we've got to gather. Because somebody's got to tell the consequences. If everybody doesn't have health care, the systems are going to fall apart. If you keep child poverty alive, it costs us $1 trillion a year to keep children poor. If you keep blocking living wages, you are blocking billions of dollars going into the economy. If you keep, Dr. King said, any nation that spends more money on its military determines all of its decision, is on a spiral towards death. And that's why finally, Amos says, in order to face this, there's got to be a gathering. But it's interesting what Amos says. He says in this text, he says, I don't need everybody. I don't need everybody. I'm always struck by this text, Liz. It says, if I can just find a remnant. I don't need everybody. If I can find some folk from Massachusetts, and find some people from Vermont, and find some people from New York, if I can find some gay folk and some straight folk, if I can find some black folk and some white folk, and some Native folk, and some Latino folk, and some Asian folk, I don't need everybody. If I can find some Catholic folk and some Christian folk and some Muslim people and some Jewish folk, if I can find some folk that don't even necessarily have a faith, but they believe in the moral arc of the universe, if I can find some folk. And if those folk will go in the street and have a meeting. Where's my brother from Maine? Where's my brother from Maine? Since you started this, come on up here and stand beside me. If I can find some folk that'll have a meeting in the public square and put a face on the problem. God says we need to have a meeting. There's work to be done. Nation claims to be one nation under God, but we need to have a meeting until we have living wages, until we have an adequate income, until we have health care, until we have affordable housing, until we have quality public education, until we have expanded voting rights. We need a meeting. But we got to get outside of the church. We got to get outside of the union hall. We got to get in the street. We got to have a meeting where everybody that cares knows how to cry, and knows how to shout, knows how to say something is wrong, and we can correct the lie of scarcity. Touch your neighbor and say, scarcity is a lie. It's a damn lie. Ain't nothing scarce in this world. God's made enough for everybody. And then there's another lie, the lie that we don't know what to do. I'm from the country, and I know what to do. I know how you get a pig, make a pig a hog. All you got to do is feed it. You want to make poor people better, feed them, let them get a living wage. You want folk without houses to have something, give them a house. Give them houses. Ain't that deep? We know what to do. And then we got to have moral conscience. There must be a meaning. You know, I thought I was wrong, and then I looked in the scripture. And y'all, I found out, can I preach just a little bit? I'm tired, but can I preach a little bit? I read the scriptures and found out that when God created the earth in our tradition, God didn't do it alone, he had a meeting. He said, let us make the world. When Pharaoh thought he had all the power, they tell me some folk had a meeting down by the Red Sea. And last time I heard, Pharaoh had drowned in the sea. They tell me that Ezekiel had a meeting down in the valley of dry bones. And the bones came together and became a mighty army. They tell me that Daniel and them had a meeting in the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were all at the meeting. Then they tell me Jesus had a meeting when he fed the 5,000. Then he had a meeting on Calvary where the people began to get up that had been dead. Then there was a meeting at Pentecost. They tell me the abolitionists had a meeting. That's how they overcame slavery. They tell me Sojourner Truth and women's rights folk had a meeting. They tell me that down in Montgomery, Alabama, they had a meeting. They tell me in Selma, they had a meeting. They tell me in Birmingham, they had a meeting. They tell me in 1963 on the mall